You see, speaking a language, it's not only the translation of words, it's also the gesture, the
Thinking,
mimics, the thinking, the way of your face expression, and the way
Right.
how your mouth move as well to
Right.
pronounce certain sounds. It's also the history and the culture was implemented in this language. That's why I think it makes total sense that you're acting different. You're acting and you seem a little different when you speak in a language.
It might be. I don't know. I would have to actually ask other people that look at me while
Of
I'm
course,
doing
yeah,
that.
from the other side.
But I remember when I was in junior high, and I remember our English teacher told us, guys, you have to. You don't just learn the words or learn the grammar. You have to learn to think in that language. And I remember thinking, like, how the hell am I gonna do that? But then there's a switch.
When you decide to start learning Mandarin?
Hey, that's a cool skill, because everybody, like, if you say, "Oh, I speak English," people are like,
Yeah.
But if you say
nothing impressive about it.
yeah, but the further you get from your own place, like I speak Swahili, people are like, "Whoa," right? And I thought, as a 12, 13-year-old,
Would be a cool language to show off in front of the girls.
I mean, no, not really. No, I just thought it would be a cool skill to have.
Which language do you use when you think?
That's a good question. It's funny because people normally don't ask me this question, but
In short, if we try to highlight the grammar difference or the biggest difference between Mandarin and Cantonese, what would you highlight?
grammar, phonology, and grammar and phonology mainly, and also vocabulary.
Why do you think a foreigner should learn Cantonese?
I don't think a foreigner should learn Cantonese. I mean, the way I see it is, if you go to a certain country or a certain part of a certain country that speaks a certain language, it would be nice of you to at least attempt to learn the basics of it. My wife is a Mandarin slash Cantonese speaker. She speaks both.
That must be helpful in a relationship as well, to understand the person.
I remember we were sitting in this restaurant, and I was there with this Australian guy and two Chinese girls. And I wanted to say, do you have a tissue? And I used the word, I should have used the word 纸巾, which is like a tissue, but I used the word 卫生巾, which is not a tissue. And I remember they were eating and they looked at me like this, and I'm like, what the hell are you looking at me like that for? You know? And then I was like, oh, right,
Exactly.
that's not the word.
Hello world, this is your favorite host Jay, and tonight we're speaking to someone who can speak 5 languages, almost. Who's a fan of Chinese martial arts and a big fan of Steven Seagal.
Did I say that?
No, but I figured out that information prior. Lukas, thanks for joining us, and I think we're going to have a beautiful conversation.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me.
Man, so if I'm getting it right, you can speak English, Polish, Russian, Chinese, Mandarin, and Cantonese.
Yeah, at different levels of proficiency. My Russian is like wobbly at best.
Which language do you use when you think?
That's a good question. It's funny because people normally don't ask me this question, but I tend to think out loud. I sometimes even talk to myself. And when I think, I verbalize everything in my head as if I heard my own voice, which slows me down when I read, but it's better at like formulating ideas. And I realized that I tend to talk to myself a lot in English, more in English than in Polish. And I wondered why, because the weird thing is, like, when you, like, I was born and raised in Poland, and English is, for me, is a foreign language. That I learned. But when I talk to myself, I often catch myself speaking in English, and then I'm like, wait a second, why am I speaking English? And I try to switch back to Polish, and I realize this weird difference in like brain activity, which it's not like I can do that, but it's not as convenient, and it's not as comfortable for me when I speak to myself in Polish than it is in English.
Do you think because English is just easier grammar, it has less rules, and that's why it's an international language? It's easy to learn for everyone.
I honestly don't know why. Because, like, for me, we could be having the same conversation right now in Polish, obviously, but and I wouldn't feel hindered by it. But like when I try to formulate ideas and I'm like, I analyze stuff, I will be speaking English, and I'm like, wait a second, Polish, and I'm like, no, back to English, and I still haven't figured out why.
It's surprisingly that for me it's the same.
Right?
Even though, of course, English is also my second language. I learned it, and I can say that I learned it pretty late, around 20s maybe. That's where I
Okay.
start speaking. But the moment when I realized that I'm thinking in English as well is when I started reading in English. I was watching movies, I was having conversation, I had my friends already, and I was using the language. But I remember when I read my first book and I closed it, that's where it was a game changer. Now, because I think your vocabulary boosts so much. And for me, it's still because English is way easier to implement.
That's interesting because, like, I now that you mentioned reading, I realized that when I was a student, I used to a lot of reading that I did, like history books, especially because history books is just a lot of text,
Mhm.
right? So I would read the passages out loud. Oftentimes, I would study with a friend of mine, with my classmate, and he would sit there, and I would read it out to him because he learned better when he listened.
I heard that's a very good strategy actually. If you're reading and you're doing it out loud, that's boosts your vocabulary even more.
Yeah, but I always hated when people read to me.
Why?
I don't know. It was like I was not much of a reader when I was a kid, but one thing that I hated more was when other people read to me. My mom laughed at me that I would
It's
do
like melatonin,
contortions.
right? And then you're falling asleep
I was like,
immediately.
what was the book about again?
Books are better than melatonin, really. If you want to fall asleep quick, you have a sleeping problem, just get yourself a book.
I like reading, but I'm a fairly slow reader because I have to verbalize everything in my head and I have to analyze every single word. I'm like, okay, yeah.
Have you heard the theory that when you speak a different language, you become a different person?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel any change in your personality when you're switching between languages?
Not really, but I noticed something that happens with my face because, like, when I speak Polish, and it's got to be something about phonology, how the words are pronounced. Because even a few days ago, I was talking to my sister, and my sister said, "Hey, listen, I never realized that about you, but when you speak, you sort of like do this." I'm like, I hate this about me. When I watch myself, a video of myself speaking, especially speaking Polish, and I see doing this, I'm like, oh, this looks so bad. But when I see myself speaking English, it's still there, but it's not that conspicuous. It doesn't bother me as much.
I think it makes sense because you see, speaking a language, it's not only the translation of words, it's also the gesture, the
Thinking,
mimics, the thinking, the way of your face expression, and the way
Right.
how your mouth moves as well to
Right.
pronounce certain sounds. It's also the history and the culture was implemented in this language. That's why I think it makes total sense that you're acting different. You're acting and you seem a little different when you speak in a language.
It might be. I don't know. I would have to actually ask other people that look at me while
Of
I'm
course,
doing
yeah,
that.
from the other side.
But I remember when I was in junior high, and I remember our English teacher told us, guys, you have to. You don't just learn the words or learn the grammar. You have to learn to think in that language. And I remember thinking, like, how the hell am I going to do that? But then there's a switch, and
We all have that skill. That's how kids learn, right? They don't study the words. They're just looking at
Right.
other people and they copying exactly what we said. The gesture mimics how everything works. Certain situation when we have to say the word. That's why movies help me a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes even my friends ask me, "Oh, how to say this?" I'm like, "I don't know how to say this, but I know which
I know how Mel Gibson says that.
exactly, and I know which situation you have to say, like when you need to use the word." When you speak so many languages, is there any special strategies that you have
When I speak them or when I learn them?
to learn them and not get messed up? And
Yeah, I've gone through several strategies trying them out. I noticed that I'm a fairly visual learner. I need to see stuff written down. So every book that I used for language learning, it was organized in a way that there were dialogues and there were texts and there was a vocabulary list. So fairly traditional setup. But I need something that I can like a scaffolding sort of thing that I can hold on to.
same, I'm even
yeah.
imagining the word. If I need to remember how to spell it or pronounce it, it's just the picture appears in my
Yeah,
head.
I remember I had this friend who I was in his car and I saw that he had a CD like Chinese for beginners or something like that. I'm like, oh, you're trying to learn Chinese, and he's like, yeah, but it's no use. There's no book. They're just speak to you, like they speak at you. And I'm like, I wouldn't be able to learn like that either, because I need to see the all the sentences and words written down. I can't just listen to them.
When you decide to start learning Mandarin?
I was about 12 when I
12.
when I was 12 when I met a friend of mine who at that time was he learned Chinese. He was learning Chinese at Warsaw University. And I remember I asked him, "Hey, what do you learn?" And he said Chinese. I thought my initial reaction was like, "Oh, that's interesting." But then the more I thought about this, the more I was like, "Hey, that's a cool skill." Because everybody, like, if you say, "Oh, I speak English," people will be like,
Yeah.
But if you say
nothing impressive about it.
yeah, but the further you get from your own place, like I speak Swahili, people are like, "Wow," right? And I thought as a 12, 13-year-old,
would be a cool language to show off in front of the girls.
I mean, no, not really. No, I just thought it would be a cool skill to have. And also China, it sounded exotic. And at that time I was already starting my martial arts adventures. So everything, all the names and people's names and place names and names of different moves and stuff, it was all in Chinese. So I was like, it would be cool to know what it actually means. Yeah.
And Cantonese came at the same moment or after you came here?
As I grew older, grew older. When I was in my teens, I figured out that there's more than Mandarin. There's Cantonese, that there's some other stuff. And it didn't really matter to me what type of Chinese I was learning, as long as I was learning Chinese. So when a friend of mine gave me this book called Teach Yourself Cantonese, I was like, okay, I guess Cantonese it is.
In short, if we try to highlight the grammar difference or the biggest difference between Mandarin and Cantonese, what would you highlight? I understand there's going to be a lot, right?
Ballpoint. Is it called ballpoint?
Bullet point, right?
Bullet point. Grammar, phonology, and grammar and phonology mainly, and also vocabulary, because you use different words on a daily basis. Some of the words, if you translate them directly into Mandarin, people are like, or sometimes they know the words, but like, that's not how they're used. And you're like, yeah, that's how they're used in Cantonese. Haha, joke's on you. And then the phonology, the pronunciation is all different, like totally night and day. And the grammar is slightly different.
Any examples that you can give of the most common one?
So in terms of grammar, there are the way you use verbs is different, because, like, for example, if you know Mandarin, then, or at least the basics of Mandarin.
That's my level.
But like, as soon as you start learning, you immediately know that it doesn't have grammar in our understanding of grammar. It's fairly simple. And then if you say that you are eating now, then you say 我在吃饭, right? But if you say I've already eaten, 我吃过了, or 我吃了, you add this 过 or 了.
Fast, which means
finished,
right?
Right. But in Cantonese, you add different words. So you will add words like, well, first of all, eat is not 吃, it's 食. And then you will add those words like 着, which means that you finished. Or
will this finished in Cantonese will change if I do different actions?
What do you mean?
Let's say if I'm not talking about I finished the food, but I finished an exercise.
Yeah. So you can say 食咗, I finished eating, or you can say 我寫咗, which means I wrote it, or you can say, I don't know, 開咗, I opened. But then you have words like 過, you have words like 緊, which is completely absent in Mandarin. Like in Mandarin, you'll say 我在吃东西, but or 我在想. 我在想 is a very good example. Right. Yeah, I'm thinking. But in Cantonese, you'll say 我諗緊, right?
我諗緊.
Yeah.
So what's the
so
again, you said some words in Cantonese which is absent in Mandarin, but those words also means finished technically.
Yeah, so they have the same or similar functions, but they're completely different words. And if you show them to people who are not Cantonese speakers, they'll be like, I don't know what this is supposed to mean.
But what will be the rule then? Like, what's the point of these words if the meaning is the same? It's just to enrich the language?
It's just a different grammar. It's just a different grammar. It's like, it'd be like asking why is the grammar of English and Norwegian different, because these
Makes
are two
sense.
different languages.
Do you know why these languages went sideways? Why they become different?
I have like a general gist of
Just the drop of history.
Yeah, so basically, if I'm not mistaken, around in the Song Dynasty, which was like 2,000 years ago or so, 1,000 something years ago, people started moving from the Central Plain, which is now like today's Henan province and I think Shanxi province or something like that. They started moving southwards and southeastwards. So they finally they were settling in like Fujian and Guangdong and so on. So they were bringing their languages with them, but as this was happening for like hundreds of years, the languages in the north kept changing. So in the end, the people nowadays, the Chinese people nowadays, they say like, oh, Cantonese is better because it's like more like old Chinese, or like Minnan is more like old
So it's
Chinese.
the south that stayed original and the north that
Well,
started.
I wouldn't say it stayed original, because obviously they kept changing, but they seem to they share some traits with like older Chinese, which Mandarin doesn't anymore.
Interesting. And I also heard that Cantonese has a lot of how you call it, the words that mean implemented from English.
Yeah, but Hong Kong Cantonese.
Hong Kong
stuff,
Cantonese.
yeah.
Is it different from the normal Cantonese?
Well, I would say both like Guangzhou Cantonese and Hong Kong Cantonese are normal Cantonese, but Hong Kong, it does tend to have more loan words from English, and sometimes like you will. Let me think if I can think of an example. Yeah, not from the top of my head, but like words like for coffee and words for like I believe that
products and technologies that
yeah,
been
yeah.
imported.
There are certain words that although it's basically the same language, you go to Hong Kong, you try to say something, or you try to use the word you learn in Hong Kong and Guangzhou, people are like, huh? So yeah, some of them.
I also know that in Mandarin, the written Mandarin and the spoken one is quite similar. Where in Cantonese, that's the biggest challenge, right? Where things that you say and things that you write can be completely different. Is that correct?
Not exactly. No, you see, Mandarin.
You can see how well I was prepared.
No, there is some truth to it, but it's a little bit twisted.
Okay.
Spoken and written Mandarin are different. Spoken Mandarin, a written Mandarin is more like is what they call like. I guess they call it written Mandarin, but it's if you spoke the way it's written, you would sound really odd. But then if you write the way you speak, it's considered bad style. So if you read a book in Chinese, you're like, oh, okay, I get the difference in phrasing.
But people don't actually speak like that.
Yeah, no. But in Cantonese, Cantonese is what they call a spoken language. It's mostly used for speaking. You can write it down, but then I'm not sure exactly how much of the written stuff is written the way it's spoken. Like I know that some magazine articles may be written like that, but then I don't read that much, so I don't know. It's normally like if you go to Hong Kong and you take a magazine off a shelf, then the only difference will be that in Hong Kong it's written in traditional characters, but the grammar and the the lexis will be pretty much Mandarin style Chinese.
But it should makes it harder when you learn, right?
It's harder for me because I have hard time sounding words out in my mind, because I'd be like, okay, how would I say it if this is the way it is in this language? How would I say it in the other language? I'm a much more fluent Cantonese speaker than I am in a Mandarin speaker. But then again, if you show me written Cantonese, I'm like, I need to focus because it's counterintuitive for me to read in this language.
It actually reminds me that in Russian, and I'm curious if Polish has the same thing, that it's one of the biggest challenges is that the things, how you write them and things how you say them is different. And it's not only because in Cantonese and Mandarin, those are characters, but in Russian, those can be just letters. So there's the word looks the same, but it's going to be a, o, just one letter that is different.
Polish is more user-friendly in this respect, because like I always tell people, like if you can get a hang of how individual letters are pronounced, with some exceptions, then you can read pretty much everything. Whereas in Russian, that was a problem for me when I was learning Russian, because I was like, okay, this is this is a oh, right? But it's the stress is on this syllable, so this is shortened to like the and then we would mispronounce words all the
All the
time, and the
time.
teacher would be like, "No, this is how we pronounce it." And I'm like, "Ah,
Yeah, but reading is the different thing. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's always even for the native speaker.
Yes,
Even,
I would say Russian, objectively speaking, Russian seems to be a little bit harder than Polish is. They're both insanely difficult for people like English
For a
native
foreigner,
speakers
yeah.
or Chinese native speakers, because grammar is just insanely complicated. But in terms of pronunciation, Russian tends to be a
But
little
it's
harder.
also what makes the language rich. That's what I believe. Yeah, because this is a very rich language. That's why the literature and everything that's connected to the words, it's has a very big influence because you can express yourself in a
Yeah.
very different ways,
Yeah.
and you can play around.
And
with,
also, when you're learning a new language and the grammar is not as complex as your own, the language, the grammar of your own native language, you'd be like, oh, that's a nice surprise. Like it'll be easier. But if it's more complex, then you're like, okay, I don't know where to start.
Going back to Cantonese, the tones, the pain of all foreigners learning.
Yeah, all Chinese people, most Chinese people will tell you that there are 9 tones. I don't exactly understand why they came up with this classification, because like I tried to read about
Isn't it? That's what I read too.
Yeah, you'll read that a lot, and they have this 9 tone system, and it makes sense, and it's somehow related to the history of the language or how it developed. But if you're a foreigner, honestly speaking, if you're a foreigner trying to learn it, it unnecessarily complicates an already complicated topic. Because I always tell people there are 6 tones in Cantonese, and if you learn this way, you're pretty much good to go. But nine tones, I understand the theory, but I don't think it's got to be that complicated.
Do you feel like there is a decline in Cantonese, and does this language has a future? Because it seems like more and more people trying to master Mandarin. It's good for the business. There's more people traveling to mainland China. I don't see that much foreigners learning Cantonese. That's why what you're doing is very unique.
But I feel
cool.
like a couple of years ago it was like that when I came to Guangzhou back in 2012. I remember some group of university students tried to contact me because they found out that I was Cantonese
You're famous
enthusiast.
for speaking Cantonese.
Well, I wasn't famous for speaking Cantonese yet, but they knew I was interested in that. And I asked them, like, what's the idea behind this whole movement? And they said, oh, it's because Cantonese is not supported as an individual language. So the Mandarin is being pushed. So we want, as local Cantonese people, we try to promote
promote the language. But the problem with that is there's many people can master it, but what's the use of it, right? I mean, okay, I can learn it to promote the language, to save it. That's a very good idea. But then if it doesn't has big implementation, where I can actually use it in the environment and my company, then where's this language will go?
It's part of people's identity, I guess. Like I bet in Russia, you guys also have like
dialects,
dialects in like local areas where, like, back in Poland we have in the
it's
south.
Not as different, of course. It's not as different.
But in this, like in the south, we have mountains, and mountain people always tend to sound different than people from other places in the country. So, and also in the north, we have the Kashep language, which is like not statistically not a lot of people speak it. But then again, you don't want to see it gone, because if you're one of those people that you feel like that's part of my identity, I don't want to see it gone. And nowadays, I noticed that I think the Chinese government is doing
trying to promote it.
It's trying to promote Cantonese more. I'm not sure if that's the government initiative, or if some other parties do that. But I noticed a lot of like social media content, people promoting Cantonese, being all hyped up about it, and I feel it's pretty good.
And I have this feeling in the city, at least in Guangzhou, that if you speak Cantonese, you're a bro. you're bro. Because if you're like we are from the same neighborhood. If we
Yeah,
can
but
speak
it's part of the
Cantonese.
reason why you don't want to see those languages gone. The Cantonese is just one example.
Exactly, exactly.
There's a number of languages in China that they're not mutually understandable dialects. They're just straight out different languages. And like Minan, I'm quite interested in Minan recently because oftentimes I go to Fujian province and I have friends there, and every time I go there, they always speak Minan, and it's completely different than anything I know. So I always sit there and I'm like, okay, I know 2 Chinese languages, still don't
Still
understand
don't
crap.
understand. It's cool that you start your story from saying that you decide to start learning Mandarin at 12 or something around there, or you heard about it.
Yeah,
And
maybe
and
13, 14.
the reason is that you want to move as further as possible from English. And I see that you truly achieved that goal now, going it further
Well,
and further from
I should move
from
on to
English as
Japanese
possible.
and Korean now because it's like further east.
After Cantonese, Japanese not going to be that surprising
Well,
for me personally.
I tried learning that, and it was the grammar is quite counterintuitive. It's all upside down and inside.
And they have alphabet. Japan has alphabet, which surprised me a
syllabic
lot.
alphabet. Yeah.
Why do you think a foreigner should learn Cantonese?
I don't think a foreigner should learn Cantonese. I mean, the way I see it is if you go to a certain country or a certain part of a certain country that speaks a certain language, it would be nice of you to at least attempt to learn the basics of it.
Try to integrate.
Yeah, you don't really need like in Guangzhou you can live your entire life speaking Mandarin, but like learning Cantonese is a nice gesture and it's good for you because it develops it develops you as well. But I've met people, including Chinese people, both foreigners and Chinese people, like, I hate Cantonese. They would come to Guangzhou, they would live and work here, and they would openly admit that they hate Cantonese and they don't feel like learning it because it sounds like whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I don't feel like speaking to you in Mandarin anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, respect the language,
Yeah,
the
like
environment of the language you live in.
Imagine somebody goes to Russia and like, I don't want to learn this ugly language. It's like, at least try a little bit.
Yeah, it helps to understand people better. So I hope I will master Cantonese maybe one day because, cheers, for the amount of time I'm living here, I should have done it already. How long you been living here?
In Guangzhou, about 13 years, I guess.
13.
Yeah.
How would you say this area of China is different from the north? For someone who I can imagine, I know.
It's hotter.
Okay. Beside the obvious things.
Yeah, but
culturally.
Obviously, food's gonna be different. I also noticed this funny thing that on average, my friends from, for example, Henan province and Shandong province, I used to live in Shandong province, they can drink a lot. And they like to drink and they drink a lot and they will get you drunk. But people in the south, they like drinking as well. Although like you will tend to get them drunk faster. Again, on average, I'm not saying like it's true for everyone, but like when I drank with my Cantonese friends, I was like always on my, I was
it was a challenge.
Yeah, I was like, watch out, don't overdo. I've overdone it once, and I don't remember anything of what happened. And it's like, okay, I'm not drinking heavily with my Cantonese friends anymore, but in Guangzhou, it's sometimes funny to see it's like 10 o'clock and already they're carrying this guy out. I'm like, what? It's 10 o'clock.
The party just started.
Yeah, I was like, I don't even start drinking at 10 o'clock. I said, what is he doing? So yeah.
Do you think there's any traditions that you mentioned that's also different from north and south?
Like, lion dancing and stuff. Like even lion dancing, both Guangdong province and Fujian province are considered south of China, although like the proper Guangdong would be proper south, right? But even then, they both of these provinces have the tradition of lion dancing. and they look complete. The lions look completely different. It's like a different set of movements and everything. And the lion dance that we, like the foreigners, think of when we hear lion dance is the Cantonese one with the big fluffy
The
thing.
head, right.
In Fujian, it's usually more like it looks like a shield that is painted to look like a lion. So it's a flat object that they hold, and it has like fluffy stuff on the edges, but it's not the full on, like a helmet kind of thing. And it's also the movements are different. The way they do it is a little bit different.
Interesting. It's very interesting how in one country people can have completely different
Yeah.
tradition from north and south. There's a lot of food. There's a lot of
Yeah, I'm not
language.
very good in like if we talk about food, I'd be like, because I've eaten a lot, and people ask me, "Hey, Lucas, do you like to eat?" I'm like, I don't know. I guess I've tried it before. I don't remember what it is.
I'm not quite sure. Maybe we should double check it. But I think I heard a story that sweet and sour sauce, right? The
Mhm.
Chinese sweet and sour, that actually, I'm probably messing it up, but people in the north, they like to eat sweet stuff, and
Mhm.
people in the south, they like to eat sour stuff. And the sweet and sour sauce was actually made somewhere in the middle of China, exactly where these two cultures are meet each other.
I can't confirm.
Can you check
deny
it? Can you, yeah, is it? Is it? Yeah. Okay, I'm getting it right.
Yeah, so they met in the middle, right?
Exactly, and that's where they blend these two
I
flavors together.
I imagine probably like 200 years ago there was like a big fight over it, which
Yeah.
food is better. It's like if you look,
And then-
I bought this book called "The History of Chinese Martial Arts of the Fujian." No, sorry, of the Fujian martial arts, right? A history, and I'm thinking, okay, there's going to be a lot of like kicking and punching, right? No, it's like war, like some sort of uprising, war. I'm like, okay, I get the gist of it.
Yeah, people before, they were solving issues in a completely different manner than now.
Yeah.
So with your level of Cantonese, because I asked you before why foreigners should learn it, you said I don't think they should.
I mean,
But
they
how,
can.
yeah, they can. But how do you use it? And except teaching.
I always
let's say.
speak it. I speak it like 70% of the time. I speak it more than English.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It probably helps a lot with the making deal with the people.
No, I speak it at home. My wife is my wife is a Mandarin / Cantonese speaker. She speaks both.
That must be helpful in a relationship as well, to understand the person. Nah.
you know, my wife, when I moved in with my wife the first time, I asked her. I said, "Listen, I know your listening comprehension in English is pretty good." She doesn't like to speak it because she feels like she's not very confident. Her English is pretty good, but she's not very self-confident in that. So I'm like, okay, you don't have to speak English, but I want to speak to you in both Chinese and English, like 50-50, because I don't think, like, before I moved in with her, there was never a situation where I had to speak Chinese all the time. So it was a lot of overload for my brain. So I was like, I'm going to be speaking too. And she said, okay, that's fine. And then I never really noticed that, but I moved away from this strategy to only speaking Cantonese. And my wife, one time, she said, "Oh, do you have you ever noticed how you used to speak?"
Cantonese starts
I'm like,
coming
oh, right,
in.
I did do that. And the second thing she said is like, I know, because I said, oh, I haven't been learning Cantonese or Chinese in general for a long time. I just speak it, right? I don't think I'm making any progress. And she said, oh, I know you're making progress. And I said, how do you know that? And she said, because when we argue, you argue in Cantonese, and you can, like, if you get really upset and angry, you can still keep to Cantonese.
Yeah, that's when it comes natural.
Naturally, when I if I stub my toe or something, I'd be shouting curse words in Polish.
It's a good point. When the emotions are coming out, that's where, and if you use that language at the moment, that's where
so
you can say that you mastered it.
I use Cantonese. All my Cantonese speaking friends, I generally, if I see them, like, hey, a long time no see, I will be speaking Cantonese. With my non-Cantonese speaking friends, it depends which language we mutually are able to speak.
How would you feel if your children would not learn your native language?
Yeah,
because it will be hard for them to learn Polish.
I'd be pretty bummed out. Yeah.
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 How would you solve that? Because that's also one of the issues that bothers me too.
I'll tell you how my friend solves it. He's
Traveling around?
no, no. He has a fairly good system, which is so he is Polish. His wife is Chinese. The children are Chinese. Half half.
Mhm.
So, but they live in China, so obviously it's going to be easier for them to learn Chinese at the native level than it would be to learn Polish at a native level. So what they do is when they're all three of them or four of them together, they will speak English. And when it's just him and the kids, it's Polish, and when it's her and the kids, it's Chinese or whatever dialect.
Wow, but is it possible for a child to learn all these languages at the
Oh
same
yeah,
time and master?
his oldest son is like 20 something now.
So when they all together, they speak English. When it's just him and
Right.
his child,
Right,
they use Polish,
Yeah.
and Chinese just naturally in the environment. go
Yeah,
play
and
learn
and
by yourself.
obviously their mother speaks Chinese to them.
Of
So
course.
his son, like you could talk to his son now in Mandarin, in English, and in Polish. Obviously his Mandarin will be native level,
Mhm.
and his Polish will be like very good. His English will be like, I'm not sure which one he speaks better, Polish or English, but he's like he can speak three of, like he could carry out this conversation in all three of
That's
them.
pretty cool. That's the way to save and preserve the language, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty good
Good
system.
strategy. Yeah, I
yeah.
think so. I think so, because it also what bothers me. I think to, again, as we speak before, to understand people and to carry the culture, you have to know the language,
Yeah.
and that's one of the important ways. One of the last thing I was about to ask you, was there any interesting story regarding the misunderstanding of languages or anything like that? You must have something where you were in the environment where you messed up the tone, or you messed up using a different language in the situation.
I don't remember them all that well. I can tell you two probably. The first one, I wasn't very upset about the first one. I was a little bit embarrassed. I guess other people were more embarrassed than I was at that time, because it was just when I showed up. It was 2010, and I wasn't in Guangzhou yet. I was in Beijing, and I went to Beijing only knowing like the very basics of Mandarin, and it was hard for me to understand people. I could say some words and phrases. And then I remember we were sitting in this restaurant, and I was there with this Australian guy and two Chinese girls. And I wanted to say, "Do you have a tissue?" And I used the word. I should have used the word 纸巾, which is like a tissue, but I used the word 卫生巾, which is not a tissue. And I remember they were eating, and they looked at me like this, and I'm like, the hell are you looking at me like that for? And then I was like, oh right, that's
Exactly.
not the word.
Yeah.
But I felt like they were more embarrassed than I was, because I don't really attach that much importance to stuff like that. It's like a natural progression. Like I think they call it intra language, when you make your own language.
Right.
But the second thing I was pretty upset about, because it was about Cantonese, and it was about something that I felt I already mastered, but apparently I didn't at that point. It was I was speaking Cantonese, and how you have like those 6 tones, and the first, third, and sixth, they are flat tones, but the register differs, so it's either high, medium, or low. So it's as if I said ma, ma, and ma, right?
It's just the volume, technically.
Right. It's just the level of how high they are. And there's a word gao, which means that something is enough, right? Gawa, is it enough? But when I was speaking fast, I would sometimes pronounce it as gao, which means dick. So, and my friend was like, ha, 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 it's not gao, it's gao. I'm like, fuck off, right? I was angry at myself, because I was like, Lucas, you're better than that. You should know better.
But it's still cool that you mastered it. Still.
Yeah, I'm very careful about tones, especially when I speak. I remember a friend of mine once said, "Oh, in Cantonese there are so many tones," but I don't think the native speakers, attach that much of an importance. I was like, actually they do.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think there's only two teams, right? Some people saying they don't care about the tones, people will get everything from the context, and some people saying no, you have to master it. But I'm going to the second team more. Even though my tones can be better, I still think if that's the rule, if that's the grammar, you can learn it.
I feel like the more tones you have in a language, the more careful you have to be. Because in Mandarin, you can mess it all up, and people are like, yeah, I know what he says. But in Cantonese, it's a little bit it's trickier than that.
Let's drink for our skills. I like the languages. I'm glad that you're here tonight.